Hello and welcome to Democracies of the World, our show on Sansad TV, where we take you through the latest happenings from parliaments across the globe. In today's episode, we will talk about elections in major democracies of the world. In the next half an hour, we will also take a look at the parliamentary structure of Malaysia and how does Nepal's electoral system work. I'm your host, Bhwana Nayar. Let's begin our show with US midterm elections. More than a week after the midterm elections, Republicans won back control of the 435-member US House, but by a far narrower margin than they predicted. Donald Trump's Republican Party have secured the 218 seats needed for a majority in the lower chamber of Congress as against 211 of the Democratic Party. While the party's margin in the House of Representatives is razor thin, it is enough to stall President Joe Biden's agenda for the next 2 years. But Democrats will keep control of the Senate when the new Congress convenes in January. A handful of seats remain to be called. Despite concerns about President Joe Biden's handling of the economy and the prospects of the country stepping into a recession, voters delivered a split verdict in the November 8 midterm elections. Meanwhile, former US President Donald Trump has launched his 2024 presidential campaign. He filed papers with the Federal Election Commission in which he declared himself as a candidate for the presidency and established a new campaign committee. By launching his campaign, Trump has rejected the counsel of current and former advisors who had cautioned him against declaring himself as a candidate for president so soon after defeat for his party. Moving on, Malaysians will be voting in the 15th general election this Saturday to determine which parties to be handed a fresh 5-year mandate to govern the country. Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob dissolved parliament on October 10th and called for snap polls, saying an election would end years of political instability. More than 21 million Malaysians will cast ballots to fill 222 seats in federal parliament and choose representatives for 3 state legislatures. Take a look.
Malaysia is all set to hold its general elections on the 19th of November. The elections are expected to calm the political instability that the country has suffered since the last elections in 2018, a period during which there have been 3 prime ministers. The November 19th election will determine if Barisan Nasional or National Front coalition can make a strong comeback or whether political reformers can secure another surprise win that will see their leader Anwar Ibrahim achieve a long-held dream of becoming prime minister. No single political party has ever formed a government on its own, and the multi-ethnic makeup of Malaysia's society has a major influence on the composition of coalitions. There are 2 main coalitions vying to form government: Barisan Nasional, which is the current ruling coalition, and the opposition Pakatan Harapan. Barisan Nasional is led by the United Malays National Organisation, a Malay nationalist party that prioritizes interest of the ethnic Malay majority. The alliance, which includes smaller parties representing ethnic Chinese and Indian minorities, governed Malaysia for 6 decades before it was toppled by the Pakatan Harapan in the 2018 polls due to widespread allegations of corruption. But UMNO returned to power in 2020 as part of another alliance after the Pakatan Harapan-led coalition collapsed. The opposition is a multi-ethnic coalition led by the reformist party PKR. Pakatan Harapan won the 2018 election under the leadership of former Premier Mahathir Mohamad, but lost power 2 years later due to infighting. Anwar Ibrahim currently leads the alliance and will be the coalition's candidate for Prime Minister. Current Premier Ismail Sabri has been named as Barisan Nasional's candidate to be the Prime Minister again. His predecessor Muhyiddin Yassin will also vie for the top post as candidate for the third alliance between the Malay-focused Bersatu and the Islamist party PAS.
I think I didn't think that, but I must support for Barisan for win. We all members, my members all, to support Barisan to win.
In this coming election, I think there is no clear dominant party as we head towards the polls on Saturday. UMNO is one of the major players, but there are also two other additional major players. The other two are called Perikatan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan.
Malaysia is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy in which the king plays a largely ceremonial role, although he has certain discretionary powers. Elections are held every 5 years unless the Prime Minister calls for an early poll. The election process is based on the first past the post system, which means the party or coalition that wins 112 seats, the number needed for a simple majority in the 222-seat lower house of parliament, will form a government. About 21 million Malaysians are eligible to vote in the upcoming election. Some 5 million will be voting for the first time, largely as a result of the government lowering the minimum voting age to 18 years from 21 last year. Voting is not compulsory and turnout fluctuates. In the last 2018 polls, 82.3% out of nearly 15 million voters cast their ballots, one of the highest in Malaysia's history. A high turnout typically tends to favor the opposition, while lower participation favors the incumbent. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Moving on to our neighbouring country, Nepal now, where close to 18 million Nepali voters will choose their representatives in the federal and provincial assemblies. It marks a momentous milestone in Nepal's parliamentary democracy, as these will be the first polls to be held after the entire 5-year tenure. This will be the second general election since the Himalayan nation promulgated a new constitution in 2015, transforming what had been a unitary Hindu kingdom into a federal republic with 3 tiers of government: federal, provincial and local. Voting for the twin elections in the Himalayan country will take place in a single phase. Here are key issues that will determine how Nepalis vote.
Nepal will hold national and provincial elections on November 20th in a contest that the country's ruling coalition, led by the centrist Nepali Congress Party, hopes to win against an alliance of communist opposition and royalists. About 18 million people are eligible to vote for the 275-member parliament, as well as the 330 members of 7 provincial assemblies through a mix of first-past-the-post and the proportional representation system. 2,412 candidates will be vying for the 165 directly elected seats, hailing from over 60 parties. The key battle pits the ruling camp led by Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba's Nepali Congress against an opposition coalition helmed by ousted Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist-Leninists. Deuba replaced Oli in July 2021 through a court order after the latter had dissolved parliament in a move deemed unconstitutional. The Nepali Congress currently leads a 4-party ruling coalition and has been in power for most of the past 3 decades. Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba, who leads the Nepali Congress Party, has allied with the Maoist Centre Party, the main group of former Maoist rebels. Deuba 76 is seeking to return to power for the 6th time. His Nepali Congress Party is considered the closest to India. UML, led by 70-year-old KP Sharma Oli, is in a loose alliance with the royalist group. Oli, known for his pro-Beijing stance during previous terms, is the favourite for the Prime Minister if his alliance wins. He has been Prime Minister twice before. The Maoist Centre Party, led by Supremo Prachanda, could emerge as a kingmaker in case of inconclusive elections. Prachanda is also aspiring for the top job. Nepal's 3 major parties, Nepali Congress, The Communist UML party and the Maoist Centre have all led different coalitions in the past, but none have served the full 5-year term due to power struggles and infighting. Maoist rebels who battled the government for a decade before agreeing to a ceasefire in 2006 have joined mainstream politics. Nepal has had 10 different governments since the abolition of 239-year-old monarchy in 2008. There are no pre-election polls in Nepal. Meanwhile, the Nepali Congress has pledged to lower the eligibility age for senior benefits to 65 from 70. It has also promised free health care for everyone and has pledged to generate 1.25 million jobs in the next 5 years while achieving annual economic growth of 7%. The UML, meanwhile, has repeated its 2017 electoral slogan, Prosperous Nepal, Happy Nepali. It is also committed to providing free medical care for those over 60 with diabetes or hypertension. The Maoist Centre, which waged the insurgency and is led by Pushpa Kamal Dahal, better known as Prachanda, wants to change the system of government itself. Neighbouring China and India, with their strategic and economic interests, will be watching the election results. China has signed infrastructure projects with Nepal under its vast Belt Road Initiative and envisages to link Kathmandu with Lhasa through a trans-Himalayan railway network. Earlier this year, Nepal approved $500 million worth of American aid to upgrade roads and construction an electric transmission line. For India, a stable government in Nepal that would keep its strategic interests in mind is critical. The rising cost of living, unemployment, and allegations of endemic corruption are some of the top issues. Inflation in Nepal hit a 74-month high of 8.64% on the year in September, according to official data. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
The Parliament of Nepal is the bicameral federal and supreme legislature of Nepal established in 2018. It consists of the National Assembly and the House of Representatives as parallel houses. Let's take a look at how does Nepal electoral system work.
Under the 2015 Constitution, Nepal adopted a mixed electoral system in which 60% or 165 representatives are elected under a first-past-the-post method. Basically, whoever gets the most votes wins. The other 110 are chosen through a proportional representation system. First, the parties submit a confidential list of candidates for these seats to the Election Commission. Voters then cast ballots for their preferred parties and the seats are distributed accordingly. Nepal has two-chamber parliament, consisting of the House of Representatives and the National Assembly, with the President acting as their head. The President is the head of state of Nepal and Commander-in-Chief of the Nepalese Armed Forces. The office was created in May 2008, after the country was declared as a republic. The House of Representatives, also known as the lower house, has 275 members. Out of the total of 275 members of the federal parliament, 165 will be elected through direct voting, while the remaining 110 will be elected through a proportionate method. The term of this house is for 5 years. Similarly, out of the total of 550 members of the Provincial Assembly, 330 will be elected directly and 220 will be elected through a proportionate method. The National Assembly, also known as the upper house of the federal parliament, is a permanent house. The National Assembly has 59 members. 8 members are elected from each of the 7 provinces by an electoral college of each province, and 3 are appointed by the President on recommendation of the government.
Tens of thousands of Brazilians gathered in different locations to protest against President Jair Bolsonaro's defeat in last month's election and asking for the armed forces to intervene. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazilians flocked to a regional military facility to denounce what they see as an unfair or stolen election, defying a recent Supreme Court order to free up roads and public spaces. 2 weeks have passed since former leftist President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva beat Bolsonaro in one of the tightest presidential races with just 50.9% of the votes. Although the Bolsonaro administration has not opposed the transition of power, the far-right leader has yet to concede or congratulate his opponent. Many of his supporters are taking the cue and refusing to accept the result. On November 11, the Supreme Court ordered law enforcement to liberate all roads and public spaces. Moving on, tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Mexico this week to protest President's proposal to overhaul the country's electoral authority. This was the largest demonstration against one of the president's efforts during his nearly 4 years in office. Opposition parties and civil society organizations had called on Mexicans to demonstrate in the capital and other cities against proposed electoral reforms that would remake the National Electoral Institute, one of the country's most prized and trusted institutions. The president said the demonstrators used the electoral reform as an excuse to protest and said they were really protesting against the transformation taking place in the country. The proposal is expected to be discussed in Mexico's Congress in coming weeks, where the president's Morena party and allies hold an advantage. Slipping into a very short break here, we'll be back with more news on democracies of the world. You stay tuned to Sansad TV. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special program, Democracies of the World. In Slovenia, Nataša Pirc Musar has been elected the country's first female president after beating her conservative rival in the second round of elections on November 13. Nataša Pirc Musar is a journalist and a lawyer who ran as an independent with the backing of Slovenia's centre-left government. Take a look.
Liberal rights advocate Nataša Pirc Musar won a runoff on November 13th to become Slovenia's first female head of state and said she will seek to bridge the deep left-right divide in the Alpine nation of 2 million. Slovenia's election commission said Pirc Musar won almost 54% of the vote, ahead of centre-right former foreign minister Anže Logar, who got just over 46% vote. Turnout among the population of around 2 million was 49.9%. Her victory boosts the country's liberal bloc following the centre-left coalition victory in Slovenia's parliamentary election in April. Logar conceded defeat, saying he hopes Pirc Musar will carry out all the promises that she made during the campaign. Pirc Musar, 54, will be the first woman to serve as president since Slovenia became independent amid the breakup of Yugoslavia in 1991. A prominent lawyer, Pirc Musar had represented former US First Lady Melania Trump in copyright and other cases in her native Slovenia. She trailed Logar in the first round of voting 2 weeks ago. But since none of the 7 contenders who competed in the first round managed to gather more than 50% support to claim outright victory, Logar and Pirc Musar went to a runoff. Pirc Musar will succeed President Borut Pahor, a centrist politician who had already served 2 terms. Having served 2 5-year terms, Pahor was ineligible to seek a third. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Moving on, Israel's president has officially tapped former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a government. The step will usher the long-serving leader back to power after a 1-year hiatus, and with him comes what's expected to be the country's most right-wing coalition ever. With his allies keen on gaining power and ending the outgoing coalition rule as soon as possible, Netanyahu will likely try to quickly wrap up negotiations. But key portfolios, including the finance and defense ministries, could prove a sticking point, and Netanyahu's partners could seek to drag out talks to achieve their aims. Netanyahu now has up to 6 weeks to conclude negotiations and cobble together a government. Thousands of anti-government protesters returned to the streets of Moldova's capital this week to express their dismay over alleged government failings amid an acute winter energy crisis and skyrocketing inflation. The protesters converged in Chisinau and chanted slogans as they marched toward the Constitutional Court. They called for an early election and the resignation of Moldova's pro-Western president Maia Sandu. Moldova, a former Soviet republic sandwiched between Romania and Ukraine with 2.6 million people, has taken a distinctly Western-oriented path over the last year. But in the past 2 months, a series of protests initiated by the populist Shore Party have rocked the country. The Shore Party's leader, Ilan Shore, is a Moldovan oligarch currently in exile in Israel. In June, Moldova was granted EU candidate status along with war-torn Ukraine. The protest hit Moldova's government as it grapples with a serious winter energy crisis and rapidly rising inflation. Russia, whom Moldova relies on entirely for its natural gas, recently halved its supply to Moldova, Europe's poorest nation. Moving on, thousands of Albanian opposition supporters last week protested the country's cost of living crisis, blaming it on alleged corruption by the centre-left government. Protesters were demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama of the ruling Socialist Party. The protest was mostly peaceful, but some broke through the police line and sprayed red paint on the main doors of the government building. Albania has seen an 8% price hike this year, especially in the cost of basic food and fuel, following the Russia invasion on Ukraine. Opposition supporters have also blamed Rama for the thousands of young men who leave the country each year in search of a better life abroad. The protest was organized by the opposition centre-right Democratic Party. Tens of thousands of public health workers and their supporters staged a demonstration in the Spanish capital of Madrid to demand more staff in primary healthcare centres. Demonstrators were also protesting what they claim is the progressive dismantling of the public health system in favour of the private sector by Madrid's conservative regional government. The Madrid region is at the centre of the protest. Partial walkouts started in the region last Monday with an all-out strike called for November 21 for nearly 5,000 Madrid doctors. The protest was called by neighbourhood associations, labour unions and leftist political parties. And that's all we have in this edition of our program on Democracies of the World. Connect with us on various social media platforms for all the latest from around the world. Thank you for staying in. Stay tuned for more informative programs on Sansad TV. Till then, goodbye. Namaskar.